It is a Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and on this edition of the show, we are going to be talking about Ja Morant, what he needs to do to be the number one Memphis Grizzlies player of all time, Jaylen Wells, whether or not he's ready to make the leap that is about to be asked of him by the Grizzlies, and is it possible that the Memphis Grizzlies could perhaps be better without Desmond Bane? As crazy as that sounds, it might be true. We'll break it all down and more on this edition of the show. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your host for this edition of the show. No to Michael Cole. Once more, we are tag teaming back and forth solo episodes. Life happens this time of year, and DeMichael and I just want to make sure that you guys get your fill of Locked On Grizzlies content each and every day. We know we've got everydayers that are counting on us. We know that you, dear listener, dear viewer, are counting on us. And even when we can't be together, even though we hate when we are apart, we will give you about 30 minutes or so of Memphis Grizzlies basketball talk here on Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast. Become an everydayer. Check us out each and every time an episode drops. Make sure that you are making us your first listen each and every day, and hang out with us as we continue to grind ever so close to the beginning of preseason basketball, the start of training camp, media day, and other fun things over the next couple of weeks here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, before we can talk about all of that kind of stuff, we still have some off-season lists to work through, some off-season content, #content to discuss. And I always love to look at the content that is generated by my good friend Parker Fleming at Substack. Does a tremendous job. If you don't subscribe to his Substack, make sure you're going and doing so as soon as possible. He closed out a list that he has been working on. He finished up a list that he's been working on all offseason long. He had a top 25 fan favorite list. Then he had a media member and content creator, top 25 media consensus list. I wanted to close it out the same way he closed it out, giving him a shout out for his list personally of the top 25 best players in Memphis Grizzlies franchise history since the Grizzlies moved to Memphis. Therefore, the key phrase there being since the Grizzlies moved to Memphis. And I didn't disagree with his number one. He had Zach Randolph as the greatest Memphis Grizzlies player. And this is from Parker Substack. The Memphis Grizzlies may have a few players with more accolades to their names during their time in the 901. However, no one made the impact of Zach Randolph. No story quite resonates like his rise to stardom in Memphis. That is extremely relevant to why the guy that is number two, and that would be Ja Morant. Now, a couple of qualms here. The last time that I was here on Locked On Grizzlies, I talked about the Hall of Fame case for Marc Gasol, how he was the most likely Grizzlies player at this moment to be a Hall of Famer, even though it doesn't feel particularly likely at this time. Marc Gasol has the resume. He has a championship. He has Olympic success. Obviously, the championship came from the Raptors and not the Grizzlies, but Mark spent a majority of his career in Memphis. He's probably the Grizzlies' best shot at a first Hall of Famer. Ja Morant is the most talented Memphis Grizzlies player ever, but he's not number one on the list that Parker shared. Zach Randolph is. And notice that Ja Morant was number two. To me, Marc Gasol would be number two. I would have Ja Morant number three. So despite the talent, despite the ceiling, despite the amazing attention that Ja Morant has brought to the city of Memphis basketball-wise, the likes of which have never been seen before, from Penny Hardaway to the aforementioned Randolph and Gasol, all these different names that have gone through the city that have been titans of basketball. Nobody has brought the buzz and the energy that Ja Morant has. And yet, on my list, Ja would be number three of the greatest Memphis Grizzlies players. And on Parker's list, he's number two. Why does Parker argue for Ja at number two? Well, it kind of goes along with why Zach Randolph is number one. How Ja Morant returns to form after injuries will be how things work out moving forward for Ja. To quote directly here, can he return to his all-NBA self and play enough games to get the Grizzlies where they want to go? That question will determine the Grizzlies' outlook for the rest of the decade. And that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Everydayers, folks that have been checking out this podcast for some time. It's no longer are we trying to win a championship or not. The question now is, if Ja Morant can't go, then what's the point? And he, in that way, is perhaps already the most significant Memphis Grizzlies player in the history of the franchise because he matters that much in terms of what this team's ceiling actually is going into the 2025-2026 season. We can talk about Jaylen Wells all we want. I love talking about Jaylen Wells. We're about to do that here in a moment. We can talk about Zach Edey. We can talk about Ty Jerome and Santi Aldama and Scottie Pippen Jr. and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. We can go up and down the roster. But if Ja Morant cannot be on the court, if Ja Morant cannot be Ja Morant, then the rest is irrelevant. The Grizzlies are not going to achieve their team goal because it's Ja Morant who is the franchise player. It is Ja Morant who's the max contract. It is Ja Morant who carries the burden of what greatness can be. And Ja carries that burden more than any Grizzlies player in history. So once again, why is Zach Randolph in front of Ja? Why would I have Marc Gasol in front of Ja? It's about substance. It's about the way things are done. I'm a big believer in the idea that you act like a winner before you win. You carry yourself in a certain way, pushing and striving for the thing that you want to be. And I think it's pretty easy to argue, and I know that national pundits would argue, that Ja Morant has not been that in the last couple of years. So many distractions, so many issues off the court that detract or take away from what the stated goal of the Memphis Grizzlies franchise, according to players and coaches, has been the last several seasons. It wasn't that long ago that Jaren Jackson Jr. was going on ESPN and talking about competing for championships. That was literally this past winter, roughly 9 months ago, give or take. 3/4 of a year ago, we had the Grizzlies' current best two-way player in Jaren Jackson Jr. going out there talking about competing for titles. Now, how far away that feels. And maybe it shouldn't feel that far away. We'll talk more about that later in the show, too. Maybe the Grizzlies are being undersold a bit. But if you are hesitant about what the Grizzlies can be, both in the short term and the long term, it is likely because you are unsure of what Ja Morant can be. And when it comes to being beloved in Memphis, it goes deeper than just basketball. Zach Randolph did so many things, both on and off the court, that the city of Memphis and the Memphis community loved him for. Marc Gasol, same deal. Marc Gasol essentially is a Memphian, having grown up there when his older brother Pau was in the league playing for the Grizzlies. Mark went to high school in Memphis. So you have direct Memphis connections in terms of the way that they interact with the city, the way that they actually were in the city. You can easily say, and most Memphians would agree, that Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol are about as Memphis as they come, even though they are not from Memphis, Tennessee. How many people would say that about Ja Morant? Honestly. And people love Ja, and Ja has a country background, being from South Carolina, and Ja has so many aspects to who he is as a person that can connect to the city of Memphis and have connected to the city of Memphis. He is beloved, make no mistake about it. But you know what the city of Memphis loves most? They love guys that hoop, and they love guys that compete. Not even necessarily win. Obviously, everybody wants to win. But Memphis loves competition and guys that compete in the name of Memphis with the name across their chest. There's a reason why one of the most iconic Tony Allen pictures is him popping that Grizzlies on the across his chest after a big play, after a game. Because that's what Tony Allen was about. He was about the Memphis Grizzlies. So Ja being on the court and being an elite basketball player is obviously going to help him in that progression to hopefully being number one on Parker's list. Number one on my list someday. And again, Ja Morant could care less about where I rank him as the top Grizzly of all time. But what he should care about is doing the things necessary to get the Memphis Grizzlies where they need to be as a contender. And that will take care of itself if he's able to stay on the court and focus on what matters most, which is Memphis Grizzlies basketball. Let me know in the comments. Hit me up on X. How are you feeling? Again, Parker Fleming, Substackolitis. Make sure you're checking out his Substack. If you don't already do so, he has Zach Randolph, number 1, John Morant, number 2, and Marc Gasol, number 3, and greatest Grizzlies since moving to Memphis. I would invert Mark and Ja. Is Parker right? Am I right? Are we both wrong? Let me know in the comments. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to discuss Jaylen Wells. Is he ready to make a leap for Memphis this coming season? Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It is all-in-one personal finance tool that brings you entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives like you and I. If you're putting off building your organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel like you're in control of your money, even without ever touching a spreadsheet. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. So NBA.com, speaking of NBA, came out with a ranking of 10 sophomores that are worth watching in the 2025-2026 season. The exact title is 2 or 10 second-year players to keep an eye on in 2025-2026. And one of the names that made the list is one Jaylen Wells of the Memphis Grizzlies, drafted number 39 overall in the 2024 NBA draft. And this is from the article over at NBA.com. Wells was the sleeper of last year's draft. I've been saying that often. An overachiever who arrived from Washington State in the second round. He finished third among rookies in total minutes, fourth in points, 14th in rebounds, and ninth in assists, starting 74 games. His usage rate was modest in the Grizzlies pecking order, but they didn't hesitate to stick him on opponents' most potent scorers. His season ended almost 3 weeks before Memphis's due to a wrist fracture. We forget how impactful that was for the Grizzlies, or at least I do. But his offensive game should benefit from Desmond Bane's trade to Orlando. And that last line there inspired me to talk about what we're going to be talking about the rest of the show. And the first piece of that is the idea that Jaylen Wells could indeed be that Desmond Bane replacement. Now, that's not a new concept, right? I'm not breaking new ground here. We've talked about that here on Locked On Grizzlies. That clearly Grizzlies GM Zach Kleiman, Grizzlies new head coach Tomas Isolo, they see somebody in Jaylen Wells who could potentially be that replacement for Desmond Bane. And my co-host, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, DeMichael Cole, has talked about Jaylen Wells being that 2 long-term, being a shooting guard long-term, and the Grizzlies trying to get bigger on the perimeter, especially next to Ja Morant. That's intriguing. I'm not sure how easy that gets with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in the mix as a starter. If you start G.G. Jackson on the wing, then yeah, Jaylen Wells is 100% your 2-guard shooter. But Wells as the Desmond Bane replacement in terms of filling that role, it depends on what you define role to be. Desmond Bane is the 3rd best player on the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm not sure Jaylen Wells is ready to fill that role. To me, Santi Aldama is in a better position to be that guy, or Ty Jerome is in a better position to be that guy. Heck, you could argue that Zach Edey, who did not make the NBA.com list of 10 sophomore seasons to watch, Zach Edey probably has a shorter path and road to that concept because he is 7'4", 290 pounds, and plays the center position. Jaylen Wells plays a spot in the NBA that requires more versatility and skill than ever before, and you could argue that his skill set is lacking in some spaces. Jaylen Wells as a creator off the dribble is not what you would want to see from a true starting 2-guard on a basketball team that is trying to contend for a championship. I think that's fair to say. I don't think that's outlandish in the least. You want to see better ball handling. You want to see better facilitation. You want to see better vision. And that doesn't mean Jaylen Wells needs to run the point, but it does mean Jaylen Wells has to be able to be that secondary creator of offense, not just for himself, but for others. And if he can't do that, how realistic is Wells being that starter accelerating the Grizzlies window and keeping it open as opposed to it shutting a little bit this season? I think that's an important question to ask. I think the defensive aspect is important because the Grizzlies are clearly looking for dogs. Arr, arr. They want to bring those types of mentality guys in. But at the same time, Jaylen Wells is almost certainly going to have a bigger usage rate this season. He's going to be asked to do more on the offensive end. So let's assume that's the case. Let's assume that Jaylen Wells sees his usage grow by a considerable amount because of the departure of Desmond Bane. Is Jaylen Wells going to be able to be that defender that picks up the toughest assignment? Is Jaylen Wells going to be asked to do that much more this coming season? Does Kentavious Caldwell-Pope get that toughest defensive assignment moving forward, allowing for Wells to take up more of the offensive burden? We don't have answers to these questions, and we're not going to start getting those answers until preseason camp and conversations with DeMichael from training camp practices. That's where we're going to start seeing this get pieced together a little bit more. But I, for one, on a team that, again, I don't see them as a title contender anymore. Maybe you do. But if you see them as a title contender, it's hard to argue that Jaylen Wells is your third best offensive option on the starting lineup. It's hard to make that argument that that's a realistic thing, even though the Grizzlies played pretty well without Desmond Bane at times last year, and we'll talk more about that here momentarily. But the fascinating thing about Wells is he going to be able to be what the Grizzlies need him to be? Is he ready for that larger load? Is he ready to maintain his defensive workload while adding to the offensive workload? Can Wells find himself as a facilitator? Can Joe Morant, who is undoubtedly going to see a larger usage rate because of the fact that Desmond Bane is no longer here, and B, is going to see more defensive attention because Jaylen Wells is not Desmond Bane on the offensive end of the floor. Will Ja be able to make the correct decisions and reads with the basketball? How this impacts Joe Morant has not been talked about as often. Desmond Bane is one of the top 50 players in the National Basketball Association. If you go off our NBA Top 100 rankings from Locked On NBA Top 100 Players, and this is on YouTube, visual on YouTube. If you're not on YouTube, Desmond Bane, number 46 on that list. Still weird to see him under the Locked On Magic logo and not Locked On Grizzlies. But when Desmond Bane was on the Grizzlies roster, you had 3 of the top 50 or so NBA players in the entire league in the mix in Memphis, Tennessee. That is no longer the case. So you're placing a pretty substantial bet on a variety of different pieces that have to go right for Jaylen Wells to be the player that the Grizzlies and maybe NBA.com expect him to be. You need Joe Morant on the court to help facilitate that growth. You need Jaylen Wells to not take a step back defensively because he's seeing an increased usage rate offensively. And you need Jaylen Wells to find his footing in a space where he is going to get different looks than he did before because Desmond Bane is no longer wearing Beale Street Blue. Wells was a product of his environment. He had guys that were being focused on by the defense. He got open shots. He got opportunities to cut to the rim, had a decent mid-range game. Doesn't get as much credit for that as perhaps he should. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm out on Jaylen Wells because I'm not. I'm out on the idea of him being this guy that can help keep the Grizzlies in that top 6 playoff conversation. To me, you're depending on a strong group of bench players, assuming that Santi Aldama is a reserve when everybody's healthy, assuming that Ty Jerome is a reserve when everybody's healthy. You're counting on that punch off the bench to be what guides you more than who the third man is on the starting lineup. Because the Grizzlies have made their choice. They have chosen Joe Morant. They have chosen Jaren Jackson Jr. They have chosen the path of the 2 superstar model. That's fine. We've talked about Jaylen Wells being an elite role player multiple times. Can he see his role expand and still be in that space? Because if he can, that certainly helps Joe Morant. That certainly helps Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and all these guys that we assume will be starters next to Jaylen Wells when everybody's healthy. It will allow for them to do what they do best. Score the ball. Facilitate the ball, rebound the ball, defend the ball, score it in isolation. Jaylen Wells is one of those glue guys that has to keep things together. Is he ready for that type of role on a team trying to be good? We'll have to find out here soon enough. Let me know in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. How are you feeling about Jaylen Wells? Again, NBA.com saying that Wells is one of 10 second-year players to keep an eye on going into the 2025-2026 NBA season. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are closing out this edition of the show talking about this idea, again, from NBA.com that perhaps the Grizzlies could be better without Desmond Bane. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5-Hour Energy. Shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with zero sugar and zero crashes. What I love most about 5-Hour Energy is how portable they are. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get that boost that you need. I got to tell you, when I am dragging in the afternoons, I go and get a 5-Hour Energy because, honestly, I love how fast it kicks in and that it's sugar-free. I don't have to worry about crashing out later on down the road. Enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-Hour Energy shots. Get the favorites you love or be bold and try something new in-store and online at www.5hourenergy.com or Amazon today. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies closes with another article from NBA.com, and it is a Western Conference power ranking conversation. And John Schumann talks about the Thunder being number 1, the Nuggets being number 2, which I don't fully agree with. I think the Rockets should be number 2. He's got the Rockets at 3, then the Timberwolves at 4, Clippers at 5, which, again, I disagree with. Lakers at 6. Warriors at 7, Mavericks at 8, and then, lo and behold, the Memphis Grizzlies, number 9 in the preseason power rankings for the Western Conference. And this is what is said after all that the Grizzlies did in the offseason. Their starting lineup, John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaylen Wells, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Zach Edey, outscored opponents by 26.4 points per 100 possessions and 222 total minutes. That was the second best mark for a lineup that played at least 200 minutes in the 18 seasons for which we have lineup data. Holy crap. Sounds impressive. But again, it's only 222 total minutes. Is that enough data to make a choice one way or another? And I'm guessing the Grizzlies front office staff says no, that was not enough. This article talks about how the Grizzlies were tied for second place in the West on March 16th. So I said, 9 months ago. It really was 7 months ago. They're 43-25. They had the league's 4th best point differential. But things went so bad over the next 6 weeks that they fired Taylor Jenkins, traded Desmond Bane. Did the Grizzlies take a step backward, the article asks, or can they make up for Bane's departure with depth and the continued development of a group that's mostly younger than him? Both Jaren Jackson Jr., who just turned 26, and John Morant, who's 26, both younger than Bane. The Grizzlies did outscore opponents by 11.9 points per 100 possessions and 372 total minutes. That's regular season SoFi play-in and playoffs combined. That's a larger sample size than the 222 that we mentioned before. That's with Ja and Jaren on the floor without Dez on the floor. That's interesting. And I do think it's fair to point out, depending on how the Grizzlies address the shooting guard position, that size on the perimeter could make a major difference in a variety of ways. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, even though he's not a traditional small forward, is bigger and stronger and longer than what the Grizzlies are used to in terms of their perimeter defenders, especially next to Jaylen Wells. And that enables John Morant to take on the shorter-armed, less effective offensively target of the Grizzlies defense almost every night. Perhaps that allows for Ja to expend some more energy on the offensive end of the floor. And I do think that there might be something to the concept of adding players like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Ty Jerome and being able to re-sign Jaren Jackson Jr. and Santi Aldama and having the names that are on this roster looking at their depth saying, wow, Vince Williams Jr. may not get much run. Cedric Coward, the number 11 pick in the 2025 NBA draft that Memphis traded up for, may not get much run depending on how G.G. Jackson looks. This team has depth. This team has the capacity to defend in a better position now than they did 6 months ago. And I do think it's fascinating to look at this Grizzlies team and ask yourself, is moving on from Desmond Bane a case of addition by subtraction? Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, he's literally the 46th best player in the NBA, according to Locked On NBA's top 100 player list. So it might be a bit of a stretch to say that they're better. And on the court, in terms of talent, it's hard to say in any way, shape, or form from a logical standpoint that they're better. But could the pieces fit better? Could the elite role player dynamic be better with Wells and KCP and Edey, allowing for Jaren and Ja to be Jaren and Ja in terms of being your stars? Maybe. I'm not going to completely discredit it, especially since, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope wasn't on the roster last year. Ty Jerome wasn't on the roster last year. Those are two guys that I think are upgrades compared to other depth pieces that the Memphis Grizzlies were operating with 6 months ago. And they had the success they did with Desmond Bane on the bench with Ja and Jaren out on the floor together. So perhaps Isolo and company see something that we as Grizzly fans miss. Maybe we're being too pessimistic. The numbers tell you a story of a successful Grizzlies playoff team last year, winning the play-in, or at least winning a game in the play-in to get to the 8th seed. Morant and Jackson on the floor, Bane off the floor, plus 11.9 points per 100 possessions. Can Memphis find the secret sauce? Who makes the most sense rotationally? Does Wells, KCP, and Edey, when healthy, even make sense? Do you think they go in a different direction with a starting lineup? Do you think Gigi Jackson gets more of an opportunity? How does Scottie Pippen Jr. fit into all of this? Ty Jerome as a bigger guard, a bigger combo guard. How is he going to be utilized? But if you're paying attention, you're noticing that I'm listing off a lot of names. Maybe Memphis is a little bit deeper. Maybe Memphis does have the capacity to endure this Bane movement a little bit better than we currently anticipate. So NBA.com clearly thinks the Grizzlies are worse. They have them down a spot from number 8 just last week. But I do think it's important to point out and understand that this is a Grizzlies team that thrives flying under the radar. I don't think anybody in Memphis is going to be weeping that the Grizzlies are not in the top 5 of preseason rankings. Memphis can do their work in the dark. John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., and the others can find their footing, get their rhythm, and perhaps get off to a hot start in a way that teams and the league at large are not necessarily expecting them to do right now. Let me know in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Could the Grizzlies actually be better without Bane? The numbers suggest and the increase in depth suggest that might be possible. I'm not sure that it's probable, but a lot of things have to go right, and maybe they are able to go right given how the Grizzlies have structured this thing around Ja and Jaren. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Don't forget that the Locked On NBA Top 100 is here. We've talked about it a couple of times on this episode. Voted on by the NBA hosts of the Locked On Podcast Network, our Top 100 was formed by experts that cover these teams and players every day. Find the full list on Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're checking out past episodes from us here on Locked On Grizzlies. Breaking down those lists, I'm going to do my best to not bring it up again, at least the way that the list shaped up, because I don't want to get mad and start your day off on a bad way getting yelled at by me. That's not fair to you. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast. Become an everydayer. Make sure you're with us each and every time that an episode drops, and make sure that you're making us your first listen each and every single day. So Michael Cole and I should be back together on tomorrow's show. I say should because life happens. But what I can tell you, dear listener, dear viewer, is one of the two of us, or maybe even both, will be with you for a Thursday installment of Locked On Grizzlies. Until then, stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. Make sure you're with us the next time an episode drops. I'm Joe Mullinax. This is Locked On Grizzlies. See ya.